All right, welcome back. Today, we're diving into a really provocative theory from the work of Guido Giacomo Preparata. It's an idea that basically flips the script on the rise of Nazism. It argues it wasn't some historical accident, but a deliberate, calculated plot. Honestly, it's a view that challenges pretty much everything you and I were taught about the 20th century.
Okay, so this quote right here, this is the core of the entire argument. The idea that Nazism wasn't just a tragic accident that grew out of a bad treaty, but that it was the intended outcome of a cold-blooded geopolitical strategy. I mean, that is a radical idea, right? So let's follow the author's logic and really see how he builds this incredible case.
So, to get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts, just like the author does. We'll kick things off with Britain's deep-seated imperial fear. Then, we'll look at World War I and the Versailles Treaty through a totally different lens. After that, we'll explore how this monster was supposedly incubated and wrap it all up with what the book calls the Great Deception.
All right, Section 1, Britain's imperial fear. Now, according to the author, everything, and I mean everything that follows, 2 world wars, the rise of these crazy ideologies, the deaths of tens of millions of people, he argues it all stems from one single overriding strategic fear held by the British Empire.
And this fear even had a name. The Heartland Theory. You gotta remember, Britain was an island, a sea power, so their absolute worst nightmare was one single power or a powerful alliance controlling that huge landmass of Eurasia. Why? Well, because a force like that would be almost impossible to attack from the sea. It could eventually build up enough power to challenge and maybe even crush the British Empire.
Okay, so what's really interesting here is how this boils British strategy down to a simple and pretty ruthless set of rules. Rule number 1, the absolute top priority: prevent a Russian-German alliance at all costs. The author argues this wasn't just a policy, it was the policy. Everything else, diplomacy, money, even war, it was all just a tool to keep that heartland divided and to stop the new powerful German Reich from dominating it.
So where does this imperial fear lead? Well, the author claims it leads directly to the first massive catastrophe of the 20th century. In this version of history, World War I isn't a tragic comedy of errors. Nope, it's reframed as the first deliberate phase of a grand siege designed to crush Germany.
And the strategy had a name, Einkreuzung, which is German for encirclement. The book argues that by creating the Triple Entente with France and Russia, Britain skillfully built this geopolitical vice. Suddenly, Germany, stuck with a pretty weak ally in Austria-Hungary, was trapped. It was facing the ultimate nightmare for any land-based power, a huge war on 2 fronts.
So when you look at it this way, the path to war seems less like a series of accidents and more like a plan clicking into place. The assassination in Sarajevo? That was just the perfect excuse Britain was waiting for. And then, when Russia started to wobble in 1917, they helped pull the USA into the war to make sure that vice didn't break. But here's the really crucial part. The war ends, but the German army is still standing on foreign soil. They were never actually defeated inside Germany. And for this supposed grand strategy, that just wasn't good enough. The job was only half finished. Which, of course, brings us to the Treaty of Versailles. Now, we all learned in school that it was this flawed, overly harsh peace treaty that just ended up backfiring, right? But what if? What if its real purpose was something completely different?
And this right here, this is the absolute core of the author's whole argument. He's not just saying Versailles failed to bring peace, he's saying it was designed to fail. The whole point of the harsh terms, he claims, was a kind of psychological warfare meant to breed a new, super-aggressive, vengeful German regime that could be aimed like a weapon straight at Soviet Russia.
And you know, the author isn't just making this up with the benefit of hindsight. He points to this American thinker, Thorstein Veblen, who wrote this back in 1920. Veblen looked at the treaty and saw it not as the end of a war, but the start of something new. He figured out that by leaving Germany's industrial power intact while publicly humiliating the nation, the Allies weren't trying to crush Germany. No, they were reforging it into a weapon for the next war.
So the big question is, how do you forge a weapon like that? Well, the book argues it was done through a deliberate campaign of economic shock therapy. The goal was to completely shatter German society and create the perfect petri dish for extremism to grow.
Get a load of this number, 1 trillion. That's a 1 with 12 zeros. That's how many German marks you needed for a single US dollar by late 1923. And according to this theory, this wasn't just a case of bad economic policy.
It was a deliberate financial purge. It absolutely obliterated the savings of the German middle class, destroyed the old social order, and left behind this massive vacuum filled with nothing but desperation and rage.
So the author lays out this cycle. It's like a deliberate boom and bust, or maybe more like a bust and rebuild. First you have hyperinflation to just wipe the slate clean. Then, boom, in comes Anglo-American money with the Dawes Plan to rebuild German industry. But he argues, rebuild it for war. Then, the 1929 Wall Street crash creates total chaos and mass unemployment, pushing millions of desperate people to extremes. And what happens next? Right on cue, Adolf Hitler, who was basically a nobody just 10 years before, is made chancellor.
Okay, and that brings us to the final, twisted act of this whole story, the policy of appeasement in the 1930s. The author's take? This was not weakness. It wasn't cowardice. It was the most sophisticated and maybe the most cynical part of the entire plan.
From this perspective, appeasement was just a brilliant piece of theater. Britain acted weak, divided, and hesitant, and that just encouraged Hitler to get bolder and more aggressive. But all the while, the theory goes, they were secretly steering him right towards the goal he laid out in his own book, Mein Kampf, a massive war to destroy the Soviet Union. The ultimate endgame? Let the two biggest land powers in Eurasia absolutely destroy each other, and then the sea powers, Britain and the US, could just walk in and clean up.
But wait, because here comes what is easily the most shocking claim in the whole theory. The author suggests that Moscow wasn't just a victim in all this, but a secret, willing partner. The idea is that Stalin knew exactly what the British were up to, and he played along, luring Hitler deeper and deeper into an invasion that the Soviet Union was ready to absorb and eventually crush. If this is true, it means the ultimate goal for both London and Moscow was exactly the same: the complete and final destruction of Germany as a major power.
So, what do we do with all this? Is this a compelling, even if it's deeply disturbing, theory that connects all the dots of 50 years of absolute chaos? Or is it just a historical fantasy, finding a neat plan where there was really just bumbling incompetence and bad luck? You know, the source material doesn't actually demand that you believe it, but it does challenge you to question the stories we're all told and to ask a really simple but really powerful question. Who benefits from the version of history we all learn?